We are currently recording. I'm just going to say a few things, and then I'll hand it over to Kitty so we can watch her wonderful presentation. But first of all, thanks everyone for being here for the second webinar in our fall webinar series. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, and afterwards we planning on uploading many of these recordings to our YouTube channel, but we'll also send a link out to anyone who isn't able to view the live recording. Those who have signed up will be able to watch it afterwards. In case you haven't heard of Wild Ones, we are promoting environmentally sound landscaping practices to preserve biodiversity through the preservation, restoration, and establishment of native plant communities. If you're interested in joining our organization, you can do so at wildones.org/membership. You can join for as low as $25 because we do not want financial limitations to prevent anybody from being able to join. If you want to check us out on Facebook, you can do so at facebook.com/Ozark Wild Ones, or you can contact us at our Gmail, which is wildonesozarkchapter@gmail.com. We just want to kind of give a plug for the two other webinars we have in this series. On Thursday, October 22nd, Dr. Don Steinkraus will be speaking on invasive plants in Arkansas and why they matter. And then on Thursday, November 5th, Cody George will be speaking on ecological land care, integrating horticulture with ecology. All right, now to our guest speaker. Kitty Sanders is the Butterfly House mentor at the Botanical Garden of the Ozarks. When Kitty retired from teaching high school social studies, she began volunteering with the Botanical Garden in Fayetteville. When the garden opened the Butterfly House, Kitty discovered that her new teaching career would be sharing information about butterflies and pollinator gardening with the public. It was during this time that Kitty became involved with the Master Gardeners and the Master Naturalists. Her work with these organizations enhanced her love for plants, and now she finds herself completely engrossed in the study of native species. Kitty has also been involved with the Arkansas Monarch Conservation Partnership for the past several years, and her work with this organization has led her to the study of plant species that attract monarchs and other pollinators. Kitty's involvement with these various organizations has led her to a greater appreciation of the cycles of nature, as well as a desire to inspire others, especially children, into being good stewards of the natural world. Kitty will present today on the life cycle and migration patterns of monarch butterflies, and will discuss plant species that are important to these and other pollinators in Northwest Arkansas. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kitty Sanders.
Hi. Glad to share monarch love with you. And hope we can do a decent job with the technology. And here we go.
All right. Looks good.
Okay. Eric asked me to do a presentation, and my big thing is butterflies, and I wasn't sure that I could stretch this to include the Wild Ones philosophy enough, but as always, when you start studying, you get more and more involved. So I will emphasize the monarch because that's what I know best, and I don't know if those of you out there have a lot of knowledge already, and if you do, I'm sorry, I'm going to hit a little bit on the life cycle, and I'm also going to talk about migration as well as plants. Some of the best plants that we can plant for monarchs are also wonderful for other pollinators. So I'm going to start with the life cycle. When we're in the butterfly house, people are always asking us, how long is the butterfly a caterpillar? How long is it an egg? And we used to say 2 weeks for everything, but that's really a huge simplification. It kind of depends on the weather and what part of the season that we're in. So you can see from this chart they give you a range of days. And actually in the early spring this year, it was so cool. We would have things remain in the chrysalis stage for way past the 13 days, and people were very nervous that their monarchs were not going to emerge. So this gives you a general idea. a lot of the adults will live 4 to 6 weeks. The egg is a very tiny thing. It's very creamy. It comes almost to a point. It has ridges. It makes it very different looking from other butterfly eggs. It's the size of a pinhead. And the monarch usually, though not always, lays it underneath the leaf. The bottom picture shows you what the egg looks like near hatching. When we see the dark spot, that lets us know that the caterpillar is about to emerge. The first thing they do when they emerge is hatch is to turn around and eat their egg casing, which has a lot of nutrients that are necessary for development. Butterflies, most of them go through 5 instars, and instar is another word for saying stage. It's the stage between the times that they molt out of their skin. They cannot stretch endlessly, so they grow to a certain point and then they have to split out of that in order to be able to eat more and continue to grow. And that's also a fun time to talk about with kids because they often turn around and eat their skin as well. This is the only stage in the life cycle with chewing mouth parts. Kids often come into the butterfly house and they're afraid, and we have to assure them butterflies don't bite, they're unable. In this 2-week period that they are a caterpillar, they grow 2,000 times the size that they were when they hatched. Larva is the scientific name. It's easier too for kids than caterpillar. They have trouble with that word. And also, I will talk about terminology some because when I started this butterfly business, there was an awful lot I didn't know. And one thing is that the very hungry caterpillar has many errors in it if you're looking at it from a scientific point of view. The larval stage is followed by the pupal stage, or a chrysalis, and the very hungry caterpillar, of course, tells us it's a cocoon. Only moths make cocoons. So lots of butterflies will leave their host plant to pupate, and I get a lot of calls. My caterpillar's wandering around crazy and going all over the place. What's the matter? Well, they're just trying to find the right place to pupate and to be safe. Monarchs like to go up, and if you raise a lot of monarchs outside in your garden, you may find them up under the eaves of your house. The first thing they do is spin a silk button. I'll show you a picture of that in a second. And they grab that with their back legs and hang upside down in a J shape where they may stay for 24 to 48 hours. And that's okay. People worry about how long that takes too. This is one of the most interesting looking chrysalids in the nature's world. These gold dots that form looking like a necklace, there is no absolute answer as to why those are there. Scientists suggest that maybe it's to ward off predators when the light shines on it, but they're very beautiful. Another interesting thing, this is the skin that he just split out of. This is the head capsule. We actually want that to fall off so that it's not in the way when they try to emerge. So you can see where the arrow shows you that little white part is the silk button that they've done. And a lot of caterpillars will do this. And this shows you chrysalis formation, slowly splitting out of the skin with this underneath part of light green showing up. So the skin splits and pushes up to, like I showed you here, and they just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle to get out of that. And then after they're in this stage, they wiggle some more. They're quite active, and it's very interesting to watch. And this shows you up close with a better camera than I have, what all that looks like. The black thing that is right here is the cremaster, which is what you see here. And it's really a very sturdy thing. It lasts through storms and wind. It's rather amazing. This particular slide shows you when it's time to get excited. the day before or the morning of eclosure. We use the word eclose or emerge, not hatch at this stage. So at that point, when they're getting ready to eclose, you can actually see through the clear casing and see the wings. And that's when you know, if you want to try to take pictures, don't leave the room, because as soon as you do, that's when they like to pop out. And this shows you what that looks like. It splits out right here, and then bam, the abdomen falls down. Because remember, that's what was hooked up here at the top. And you notice the size of the abdomen compared to the wings. It's just amazing that this creature is inside that tiny capsule. The abdomen is disproportionately large compared to the wings, as you can see in the bottom left photograph. And of course, this monarch could not fly at that point. And so if you raise them, you want to not jiggle them, you want to leave them alone. You can see how it's hanging on to its casing, and it may do that for 2 to 4 hours as it pumps fluid from its abdomen into those wings. We always heard as children that you need to let them dry, and that's true, but more than that, they're pumping the fluid into the wings to expand them so that they will be able to fly later. And you can see that the abdomen is becoming smaller and smaller in proportion to the wings. And this is just another shot showing what it's like right after it emerges. That's a good looking butterfly. We like to see a lot of white on the abdomen. For some reason, that indicates better health. So then in adulthood, their only goal is to feed and to reproduce. At this stage, they will nectar. Different butterflies use different things, and some nectar on rotten fruit or tree sap. But when they first emerge, they have 2 straws that are there. And in the process, there's a lot of wiggling that goes on. I'm going to back up. In this stage too, if this were a video, you would see this swinging back and forth, and that's part of how they push the fluid out into the abdomen. But it's also the time when their proboscis joins, and the 2 straw parts have to join together, or else they won't be able to use it to nectar. So at this stage, nectar is what is important, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. I like to show this picture because sometimes people like to be able to distinguish between male and female. It's rather easy with monarchs, not so much with some of the other species. But the male has that scent gland that you can see the blue arrow pointing to, and the female does not. And you notice that her wing veins are also larger. The scent gland, in some butterflies, that is very important. From what I've read, it's not hugely important in drawing the female to him. So here in this stage, the primary purpose is reproduction of the species. And it's a really fascinating thing to me. And you can see that the legs on these monarchs, they have to be able to find the right plant. And the right plant is milkweed or Asclepias. And they're able to find milkweed generally in the area through their antenna. But if you think about all the foliage that's out there, it's pretty amazing that they're able to narrow down which is the right plant to lay the egg on. And they do that by tapping the leaf, and that releases chemicals in the leaf, which is picked up by chemical receptors on their feet and feet and the bottom part of their legs. And that allows them to know they're in the right place for laying that egg. They love fresh foliage. If you've ever raised monarchs, you can see that they'll go to the ones with the more tender foliage. If you've cut it back and you have tender foliage, they prefer that. So before I go on, I do want to mention that not just monarchs, but butterflies in general, but fewer than 10% make it to adulthood. There are a whole lot of things that get in the way of making it to adulthood. Here you see some ants carrying off an egg. There's a little mite on the bottom left that is feeding on an egg. Spiders eat them. Our friends, the ladybugs, eat them. So that's why you will see them lay so many eggs, maybe 300 to 400. It's even more difficult to survive when you're a pupa and you're nice and fat and juicy. There are so many different predators that will attack the monarch. I don't know if you can see this one on my small screen. It's not that easy, but this is the larval stage of a beetle or a bug. And he has a very sharp proboscis, which he sticks into that poor little caterpillar and just sucks the life right on out of him. If you see a caterpillar hanging kind of in half like that, that's because somebody has done that very thing. Spiders, beetles, birds not in North America, but South America, and Mexico, we'll talk about that later. Here's a crab spider lying in wait. Besides that, there are parasitoids. The tachinid fly lays its eggs inside the caterpillar, and sadly, those eat the caterpillar from inside out. If you're going to raise monarchs, the telltale sign of this is if the caterpillar just kind of hangs there limply and you see this string hanging down, that's how the larva or the pupa drop down out of the caterpillar. Sometimes they come out as pupa. These are the pupa of that fly, or sometimes little white grubby looking things. And there are a variety of other parasitoids. And besides this, there are diseases. There are virus and bacteria which prevent development. So why monarchs? You've heard, I'm sure, in the news how the monarch population has dropped between 80 and 90% in the last 20 years. And though we see that this is an up year, that's not really statistically significant. We need to see up like that, and not just one good year for there to be a real resurgence in the population. And a lot of why we're seeing the decline of the monarch has to do with habitat degradation. In Mexico, which we used to love to blame for the problem, all the problems, the oyamel forests, which are a very particular climate, have been logged for a variety of different reasons. But this shows you the deforestation there. And the microclimate that is in this part of the world, these are mountains that are about 10,000 feet in elevation. They're very cool. It often has a cloud cover. And all of this allows the monarchs to just kind of hang out for the winter where they mass together. This picture came with a caption that said they can have 15,000 monarchs on one branch. And being that close together also helps protect them in terms of their of temperature and staying warm. Only 20% of this forest remains. Not only is logging a problem there, but also trees are being taken down so that avocado trees can be planted. You might have seen that. It's been in the paper a couple of times recently. So these specific overwintering conditions include the elevation that I mentioned. They need a stream nearby because there's not any nectar. It's winter there too. And they're not going to be getting any nutrition, but they will sometimes hydrate at nearby streams. The slopes need to be fairly steep and facing a south-southwest orientation. Now this looks like a diseased forest, but the orangish part that you're seeing is where monarchs are roosting. In our own country, habitat degradation is occurring at alarming rates in monarch breeding territory. You've heard probably a lot about the loss of breeding habitat due to monoculture in the Corn Belt. There are other agricultural practices that are destructive for the monarch. Milkweed is, after all, called milkweed, and that's how a lot of farmers perceive it. And so fields are sprayed to make sure that it's not there. And in that breeding area, the scientists have guesstimated that about 60% of the milkweed has been destroyed. And that's about a third of the breeding habitat for monarchs. There's also a concern about corn that has been modified and genetically modified with BT, and whether or not that pollen from the corn lands on milkweed and also is a problem for caterpillars. That seems to be up in the air from the studies that I've read. They also farm differently in that I was in Pennsylvania a few years ago, and I remember farming going up to a fence line, and then there was a stretch of land to the road, and you don't see that anymore. They're farming right up to the road. So that also is taking away habitat that used to be used. And other degradations occurring due to the use of pesticides. It's hard for me to follow behind a mosquito Joe truck. You understand the need for that because mosquitoes carry disease, but it has an impact on the rest of the insects as well. Roadside management. There's a lady that works with our group who's in the transportation department, and she's doing all she can to get people to either not mow the roadsides, you know, unless it's a safety issue on the highways, and if possible to mow at times when the milkweed has had a chance to set seed and fall, so that there's more opportunity for the milkweed to spread. And it isn't just farming that has taken over land. You look at the sprawl of the suburbs and the malls. So a lot of breeding ground has been lost in this way. Another problem is occurring because of climate and weather. The extremes in weather are very hard on monarchs for lots of reasons. Obviously, if you kill their nectar plants because there's a drought, that's a problem. If the weather's too dry, the milkweed's too dry, then that's not good for the caterpillars. And there have been some severe weather events in the overwintering sites, and monarchs cannot tolerate freezing for very long. And so when those things happen, it's pretty much a disaster. I remember maybe 3 years ago, we heard about a huge storm in Mexico in March. People reported walking on layers of monarchs after that winter freeze. There was also a pretty bad freeze as they were making their way into Texas one year. So a lot of people say with the decline of insects in the world, the decline of pollinators, why is there such an emphasis on the monarch? And I want to answer that question before we go on. The group that I work with, the Arkansas Monarch Conservation Partnership, is a statewide group associated with the National Wildlife Federation. And their goal is to draw people into monarch conservation so that you can also educate about how planting for monarchs and taking care of monarchs helps many, many other insects. And so it's more that the monarch's being used as a poster child, as an advertisement. Everybody loves the monarch. They'll run from a bee, but they love the monarch. And so you can use it as a teaching tool. Also, the migration is just such a fascinating thing, and that draws people to it. And so to the plants. I'm always kind of embarrassed how old I was before I started understanding the relationship between insects and plants, and how many insects need particular plants in their larval stage, and without them they cannot develop. So the host plants, that's the term we use for the plants that the larval stage requires. And what a lot of people don't understand is if the eggs are laid on something other than the host plant, then the caterpillar cannot make it. It may hatch, it may take a couple nibbles, but it can't digest it, or it's toxic, and so it won't live. The toxins in milkweeds are a huge aid in monarch survival, because they taste so bad to birds that they retch and then don't eat another one. That is until we get to Mexico. The nectar plants are what the adults use. It's important to understand that insects are drawn to flowers of different colors and different shapes. For the most part, butterflies are drawn to really bright colors, while bees are drawn to whites and blues and yellows. And that has to do with their vision. They see different ranges in the color spectrum that we do. They see ultraviolet light, which we cannot see. And that's a whole nother interesting story. The nectar plants you plant for monarchs, though, many of them support a variety of other pollinators. Monarchs and milkweed. As I mentioned, milkweed has a sticky latex in it that is filled with something called cardinalides, and those are what poison or make sick vertebrates who might eat them. The ones who can tolerate it are these predators in Mexico: the black-headed grosbeak on the left, the black-eared mouse, and the black-backed oriole. These somehow have evolved to be able to tolerate those toxins, and they feed heavily on the monarchs in the winter. Milkweed itself can be an enemy. Because it is sticky, sometimes the small caterpillars and even the larger ones, mandibles will get stuck together and then they starve to death. And if you look here, this shows the pin, but just a straight pin. This shows you the size of a fairly new caterpillar. And what these little guys do is eat in a circle. And what that does is cut off the latex so they can eat a little bit more and a little bit more. And it doesn't. They have an easier time eating. Sometimes you'll see where a leaf will be bent in half at the vein. The monarch does that for the same reason. They'll chew that and then let it sit for a bit, and that cuts off the latex and makes that easier to eat. So in planting milkweed, there are a lot of native Asclepias throughout the country. I'm going to talk about the ones that are most readily available here and suited to our country. The tuberosa is also called butterfly weed. This is what you see growing along the highways. Very hardy plant. It can tolerate drought. It has a taproot. It's easy to find in nurseries. It really likes sun and good drainage because of that taproot. One of the things that we started doing at BGO is to cut this back in early July in case there are any monarchs who have not moved north to the breeding grounds. That will create new growth. And as I told you earlier, they really prefer the tender growth, and that gives them a better chance of making it as caterpillars. This is probably, Eric mentioned that Don Steinkraus is going to talk next week. This is his favorite milkweed. He thinks that it's what they come to most readily, and it's a beautiful plant. It's taller than the other one. It will assume a vase shape in about its third year. It is, it's bigger as it grows, but it doesn't take over. It's called swamp milkweed, which is kind of a sad misnomer in a lot of ways. To some people, that makes them think it's an icky plant. It also sounds like it can only grow in moist conditions, and that's not the case. I don't have moist conditions. I have dry and half shade because I live in Fayetteville, where we have hills and trees, and it's hard to find the sun sometimes. And this one grows in a couple of different places in my yard. So I do think it's real versatile, and it provides a lot of foliage. Visitors, you know, and I should have said here, I can't get pictures because they're usually tiny insects, but in patches of the butterfly weed like this, you will see so many different kinds of tiny, tiny pollinators, many kinds of bees, tiny wasps. Let's see. Carpenter bees, small resin bees, paper wasps, beetles, and many butterflies will use this particular plant. It will just be covered with pollinators, more of the little guys than the butterflies, actually. These are some of the visitors that will come to the swamp milkweed. On the left is a great black digger wasp and a honeybee in the middle. Then on the right is a great golden digger wasp, of course the monarch, and the bottom right is a dun skipper. So the swamp milkweed, when it was blooming at BGO, they have a big patch of it. It too was just covered. I couldn't count how many things were on it, and I was lucky to get these pictures. Another native is Syriaca, which is called common milkweed. The benefit to this one is that it's huge, huge leaves and a lot of food for caterpillars. The disadvantage is that it spreads by rhizomes. So if you have a small garden, this is probably not your choice. It also grows quite tall. It can be 6 feet tall, but it's manageable. Lissa Morrison at BGO used to talk about how to deal with natives, and she always said, the ones that you can, that it won't ruin the flowering, cut back by half in May when the kids get out of school. So you don't have to have a date, just think when the kids get out of school. And if you cut it in half, you will have bushier plants and they won't be so unmanageable. That does not, however, help the rhizomes. And so you really do need some space if you want to grow this plant. It is, however, one of the ones that comes up earliest in the spring when the monarchs are migrating north. And so that's another plus. This is one you can't really find in nurseries too much. Eric mentioned that I work with the Master Naturalists, and we have a native plant project, and we are growing this one. It emerges really early, and it also blooms early. So it's very good for that spring migration. It is about 3 feet tall and a really lovely thing. And there are many others. You can go online and find them, but they're not always easy to find. So onto the nectar plants. You know, science is fun because you read one article and you find, I didn't know that. And then you read another article and they say, well, that's nuts. That's not accurate. And so they're back and forth, as we know. One study, however, suggested that nectar is more important than providing milkweed. And that's especially true in the case of the migration. As you're looking at planting a garden, you need to consider plants that are good for each season. In the spring, we have the migration, but also in Arkansas, a lot of the first generation eggs are laid in Texas, but you will see some of those butterflies that look like they have overwintered in Mexico make it clear up here. And so we want to have milkweed available for that generation. In the summer, this year everybody said there weren't many monarchs. Where are they? Well, I think that's probably a good thing. They're supposed to go north. That's their natural habitat up there for breeding. But in the summer we will have some, so planting some summer nectar plants is important too. And then most importantly for nectar is the fall, where we see quite a few monarchs coming through, and there is so much that they are doing at that time to build their body fats and to also fly, so that as much nectar then as possible is needed. We'll start with some of the spring offerings. There are lots more than what I'm showing you. I find it hard to find things for spring that are native and that are monarch. As we know, the bees come out early and they need things too, so these are very helpful for those. On the left is something called rose verbena. You might hear it called rose cane. And it's a ground cover that blooms very heavily in the spring, but then sporadically the rest of the season. So it continues to provide some nectar. Woodland phlox is a pretty dainty bluish purple thing, grows on the edge of the woods and comes out quite early. And then there are a variety of the Amsonia, or the blue star. The one that, I'll show you the name of it in a second because I'm not sure how to pronounce it. We have the Arkansas blue star, which is beautiful and has wonderful fall foliage. But this one is more, I see come up more on monarch lists. So this is the rose verbena with a clearwing moth, also the woodland phlox with the clearwing moth. Down here, we have the phlox with the tiger swallowtail. And here's a bee on the Amsonia. And I thought I labeled these. It's the one that's called Eastern Blue Star, and it's the scientific name starts with a T, Tabermon something or other. I'm gonna send you guys a list of some of these with Eric's link to this presentation in case you're like me and you can't take notes fast enough. In late spring or early summer, another good one is Bradbury's Monarda. What I like about this plant, as I told you, I don't have a lot of sun, and this blooms even though it gets maybe 3 hours of sun in my yard. And it's not like the one that we normally see. It's much lower growing. It's about 1 to 2 feet tall. So that's a really nice specimen. Summer offerings. If you've ever heard me talk before, you're probably sick of hearing this. If you can only plant one thing, I would plant a purple coneflower. If you're on a TV screen, you can't really see this. If this PowerPoint were up on stage, you could, but there are 8 monarchs on this one plant. And it is just a huge nectar plant. Other pollinators that visit, this is a great spangled fritillary, bumblebee, and another bee on this one. Bumblebee, this is a leafcutter bee. I'm not sure what that one is. I'm not great on my bees yet. I learned some from doing this. And I think the way the abdomen on that looks, that might be the small carpenter bee. There are other native coneflowers. They're not, they don't draw as much, but they're still lovely things to have. The pale purple coneflower and the yellow coneflower bring sweat bees, leafcutter bees, carpenter bees, longhorn bees. Then these summer plants are nice because they can give some structure to the garden. And I think one of the things we have to consider is it's talking about plants that people want to put in their yards. Because when you say natives, most people think of the 6-foot tall things along the highway. And there's so many other things available. On the left is Culver's root. I love this plant. It's very airy and delicate. Mine grows with very little sun. It doesn't get that much bloom to it, but very little sun. So it's good for those of us who don't have quite the right butterfly conditions. On the right is lead plant. Many people suggest that this should be planted instead of butterfly bush, which is invasive in many parts of the country. That's another one of those arguments about what's invasive and what isn't, what scientists believe or have studied. This plant brings honeybees, mason bees, green metallic bees, wasps, flies. This plant brings long-tongue and short-tongue bees, and this beauty, which is a southern dogface, and you almost cannot get a picture of that. Shows the beautiful delicacy of this thing. It has all this wonderful pink around it, and it's really a gorgeous butterfly. Other summer plants that are good for monarchs and pollinators, Texas green eyes. I love this plant because it blooms forever. So many things bloom for a month and they're done. My Texas green eyes blooms all summer long. And I do cut it back just to promote it blooming more, but you don't have to. It grows maybe 3 feet tall. On the right is one of the mountain mints. Most of the mountain mints are phenomenal for pollinators, and you'll just see a constant hum around them. The slender mountain mint is nice because it has the very fine, airy foliage. So it's a pretty plant even when it's not blooming. A suggestion for planting these mints that you're worried about spreading too much in your yard is to take maybe a 3-gallon pot and cut the bottom out of it and set your plant in it and plant it in there with the dirt. And then that will prevent the roots from running so much. Set it about ground level. And that has helped me with some of those mints. Now, you think I should jump into the fall plants, and I probably should, but that requires, again, a reminder of the migration. I want to see this. And I've met some people who are driving along the highway and they look up and this is what they see overhead. The migration, during this time, they have to build up their body fats, not only for the flight, but because they're going to overwinter in Mexico for 7 to 9 months. And as I told you, there's no nectar there. So imagine making this 3,000-mile trip, all the while trying to gain weight and hold on to that weight so that you can last 7 to 9 months without eating. And that's why the fall nectar is being pushed so hard. I love this map. It might have too much stuff on it for you. It did for me initially, and it doesn't show up very well here, but there's a certain color in it that shows that the range of the monarchs is clear up here in Canada. Most of them are in this area, but some of those who migrate fly over the Great Lakes and then come down. Now, while the spring migration is kind of scattered and they kind of go all sorts of directions, you can see from this orange color that a funnel shape, that they're kind of funneled into a particular direction to travel, which is south to southwest. And they converge here and fly in a very narrow path down to the overwintering grounds and then take a sharp turn to find those right mountains, which is the right place. It's just a fascinating thing to me that they're able to do that. As I said, they lived there for quite a long time. This is the 4th generation, which emerges in what's called reproductive diapause. What that means is they're not mating. And so the energy that they would be using for mating is saved for the flight and for overwintering. There is a fellow in Oklahoma, though, who thinks that maybe in Arkansas, we have a 5th generation that breeds. And I know that a lot of calls come in late August and September about, do you have any milkweed? I've got too many plants. And so if you look where that little blue circle just appeared, that's where we are. And you can see that we are in that breeding ground. We're right in the middle of the flyway. Arkansas has been ignored pretty much as far as monarch territory. More attention is being paid now. But we do have a lot of breeding that goes on. So host plants are hugely important in that late summer season. And then also flying through for the migration. This also shows the significance of us. We're in this area. So, you know, pretty good numbers of monarchs come from us and filter down into Mexico. And it's another one of the fascinating miracles of all this is how many different directions they're coming from, even up in Canada, all these different places. Not so many from the East Coast. Many of these will end up staying in Florida, but the rest are coming down into this very narrow region. I'm going to go back for a minute because it's important to understand that the continental divide, there's some overlap there, but very little. These Western monarchs, there might be a few that go to Mexico, but most of those overwinter in California. And one of the really negative things that breeders are doing is breeding monarchs for wedding releases. There's a whole lot to talk about why that's ecologically a bad idea. But for migration talk, one of the important things is if these guys are raised here and they're shipped here for a wedding, they are not programmed to come here. And so you're disturbing that natural sense of where to go, which is over here. So migration, it's fascinating to think about these tiny creatures, and they weigh so little, traveling as far as they do and how far they can travel. Monarch tagging, which I'll talk about in a little bit, enabled us to see that one traveled 265 miles in a single day. They fly quite high many times, and what they do is I'm talking to you with my hands because that's how I teach, which is probably not very helpful here, but they follow the updrafts and use the air currents and those thermals to help them travel so they're not flapping their wings the whole time. And the more they can do that, again, the more they can conserve the body fats. Some of them, it takes them 2 months to make this trip. People always ask, how do they know? How do they know where to go? How do they know it's time? And scientists don't have definite answers yet. They have, based on scientific evidence, some hypotheses. One seems to be the shorter days signal something for the monarchs. There's something in their antenna that allows them to understand the positioning of the sun. So of course it's on a different place on the horizon. Cooler temperatures are probably a signal too. And it might be that because the host plants are getting older, they're understanding it's time to leave. Understanding, I say that as if they're human. Again, they don't have specific and for sure information about how they know where to go and how they know to funnel into that narrow pass that leads them to the overwintering site. But they do think that the angle of the sun helps them determine where to go. They've done some interesting experimentation on cloudy days, and they still seem to fly south and southwest. So they just really don't know. That's part of why they think maybe there's a magnetic pull of the earth that has something to do with it. And this is a picture of what those furs look like, not unlike the furs that we have in this country. So the mysteries that are unsolved, how do they know that direction, south to southwest? When they're moving down from the north, They gather in great roosts at night and hang out together. Not sure why. Maybe again, it's a protective thing. Some people have report, you know, in the United States have reported huge roosts in trees on their property. Sometimes they'll stay there for a couple of days, and if there's a lot of nectar, and again, continue boosting their body fats. These are just some of the things scientists have yet to answer. So back to the plants, nectar for migration. The first ones that I'm going to talk about kind of bridge that summer-fall gap for us. When I study monarch plant lists, I've found a lot that I don't see them using here. And it may be that they reach their maturity at the wrong time. So, you know, if some of those monarchs are hanging out and reproducing here, then this late summer fall set of plants can be very useful. The Liatris is a huge, huge pollinator plant. This one you don't want to cut back, because you'll be cutting off the flower head. Aspera on the left probably blooms the latest. You'll hear it called rough blazing star or button blazing star. And it's a real monarch magnet. The one that gets the greatest press is this one called meadow blazing star, which you don't see around here as much, maybe on the prairies. It's not as readily available. Squarosa is another one that they love. It doesn't grow as tall as the meadow blazing star, so that's kind of a plus. The one you'll see a lot in nurseries is the one on the far right, the dense blazing star. That's very common. With the Master Naturalists, we have grown both the rough blazing star and the scaly, as well as this. And so if you're not, you can always email me if you want to be on that list to know when we're having those plant sales. A lot of you may be Master Naturalists already and have that information. So other pollinators that visit, this bumblebee was in my yard. On the right, you have soldier beetles and another bumblebee. Liatris calls, all sorts of bees, wasps, tiny butterflies, skippers like it a lot. And the next one is Joe-Pye Weed. Listen to Doug Tallamy talk yesterday. He said we got to quit calling things weeds because then people think they shouldn't plant them. So we should say Joe-Pye. Again, you can't see all the pollinators on the plant on the right, but it shows you its growth habit. This one can be quite tall. There are several varieties. And I'm not sure on my scientific pronunciation, but the maculatum is, I think, not a native in Arkansas, but it is a native in Missouri. And a lot of the plants I look at that Missouri area just north of us because we're in the same ecoregion. Excuse me for a second. I'm trying to find my list. The Joe-Pye calls tons of butterflies and lots of bees and wasps. The ironweeds, again, the one along the roadside can be very weedy and very, not what you think you might want to have in your garden, but they can be gorgeous plants, and it's one that you definitely can cut back in the late spring, early summer. This one is at the BGO, you can see it there. It's a beautiful color. Baldwinii is a shorter variety, and also Mazurica is a shorter variety. And this Mazurica is more a magenta color. You can see it has a lot deeper color than the Baldwinii. The pollinators that are drawn to that. I'm having a hard time with my second source here. Pardon me, please. For some reason, it keeps blanking out on me. Technology, huh? Joe-Pye likes moist. It can grow to 7 feet tall, but as I said, there are shorter varieties. It calls honeybees, bumblebees, longhorn bees, leaf-cutting bees, bee flies, butterflies, skippers, and moths. The ironweeds. These on the left 4 to 6 feet, in the middle 3 to 5 feet, on the right 3 to 5 feet. I use Missouri Botanical Garden site a lot to feel like things probably grow similarly here as they do there, so that you can have some sense of how these will act in your yard. On these ironweeds, you can see at the top a robber fly. You know, he's new to me. I had never seen one before. Bumblebees. On the bottom right is a variegated fritillary. Of course, you know the monarch. Tall phlox. Many times this is called fall phlox, and I don't know why, because it really starts blooming heavily in the summer. And it is just the right shape for butterflies in terms of being a place to land and move around and nectar without having to fly around and find more flowers. The one on the left is the true native. The one on the right is one that we've planted at the Botanical Gardens called Gina. And then there's autocorrect, changing paniculata down there to paniculate. The Gina, we have found, is less prone to the powdery mildew. And the Mount Cuba Center, which studies natives, said that it actually drew more butterflies than the native. So I had Eric's permission to kind of share some that, you know, sometimes they find a variant on the side of a road and then they bring it into the mainstream to propagate. And it's not that this one has been hybridized or anything, but it's very close to the original native and provides a ton of nectar. On the left, you see boneset, which is along the highways a lot. Laurie Spencer says that boneset is hugely important for males for some reason as they migrate. And she told me that years ago, and I can't remember why. At the top there, you see another great spangled fritillary nectarine on it. The boneset, again, will be a buzz with bees, as will the blue mist flower on the right. The blue mist flower spreads by rhizomes, and that's always alarming sounding, but it's actually very easy to pull out. For me, again, it's another good one because it grows in sun or shade, and it's a lovely blue thing. Grows maybe 1.5 to 2 feet tall. The asters, of course, are huge in the fall. New England aster on the left blooms earlier and is generally covered with bees, but it's a very important fall migration plant. On the right, you see the aromatic aster, and that's a lower growing aster, maybe 2 to 3 feet tall. Makes a nice, wonderful spread. And you can see that also at the Botanical Gardens. It's in just huge swaths. I think it's important now to say something I should have said earlier. You want to plant nectar plants together. You want to have a swath of color. Butterflies don't really pick out one flower that easily because of the way their vision works. So it's better to have 3 to 5 plants of the same thing together so that they're drawn to it more easily. The other place I want to talk about, not exactly a native, but darn close, is the New England aster, also listed with the Mount Cuba Center. And I am spending my COVID time babysitting my granddaughter and trying to plant more natives in my son's yard, who has way too much lawn. And this summer while I was there, this thing has been blooming for 2 months. And I took every one of these pictures, which explains why they're not always grand. But you see honeybees, you see the tarnish bug. There's a painted lady and an American lady. Eastern bumblebee, skipper, buckeye. This is an orange sulfur in here. It has been nonstop on that plant. And there are times when I could not possibly count all the bees that I see on it. This is a leafcutter bee. They have that funny yellow abdomen. It's where they pick up their pollen. Goldenrods are also great. Again, you know, kind of like these are not your mother's genes. The goldenrod that you see along the highway is not what you have to plant. There are many, many beautiful species. Someone told me there are 26 species of goldenrod in Arkansas. The one on the left is the one that I see on most of the monarch plant lists, the gray goldenrod. I don't know if you know Rose Gergeritz. She hates it when we call things gray because she thinks that makes them unappealing. But that is one of the names, or old field goldenrod. The one on the right is wreath goldenrod. Again, another plant that you can grow in the shade. It has those arching branches. It gets no more than 3 feet tall. There are many, many goldenrods. Another good one is cliff goldenrod. And I don't know which all goldenrods these are, but here you see the bare thread, the narrow-waisted wasp, another variegated fritillary, and the two-spotted, I'm not sure I can pronounce this correctly, scollid wasp. So again, the variety of pollinators that you can draw by planting for monarchs is just amazing. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but I left these 2 slides in from another presentation. It's becoming increasingly apparent that we have to plant more native plants, that we are losing huge populations of insects, huge populations of butterflies. There are so many insects that are species specific and have developed relationships with plants such that there are some bees that can only gather nectar from a certain plant. Certain plants can only be pollinated by a particular plant. One of the people I work with Master Gardeners, can't stand for people to kill tomato hornworms. She says as a moth, they pollinate a very rare native, is it an orchid? And so, you know, there's a lot about these interrelationships that we don't know. And it's important to start building that plant base back up. They offer more than nectar. Planting native plants is really good if you have an area with runoff because the roots go so deep. That also means that they need less water. They don't need fertilizing like other plants do. Sure, they, you know, somebody challenged me on this, a friend of mine. Sure, fertilizer will help in some cases, but in many cases they don't require it. So it's a cheaper plant in the long run because they require less care. Even spots of these plants in our gardens provide stepping stones for insects, which is what is meant there by connectivity. I want to also talk a little bit about citizen science as we talk about monarchs and this whole thing of improving conditions for native beings. Citizen science is hugely important in helping us learn things, because scientists cannot always, they don't always have the funding, and they don't have the time to get out and study all that's going on. They certainly couldn't follow monarchs from Canada to Mexico. So one of the ways that they've actually learned about the migration is through the efforts of tagging. You may have heard of tagging monarchs. And by doing that, they have been able to determine those paths that I showed you, and have been able to understand how far they travel in a day, just a whole lot about migration. Other things that they're studying through citizen science are what factors affect migration, what part does weather play, where are the resources. Again, that's helping to understand that need for fall nectar. Where are these monarchs roosting? Where are those sites that are good? Can we preserve them? It has helped us to understand the declines in the monarch population, also the improvements. There are sites that help with monarch health study. And so I encourage you to kind of investigate some of these. It's really fun to monitor the migration both north and south. One of my favorite websites is journeynorth.org. It has, you just should go there. And in these times when you need something to do and it's fun to learn something, try this website, because it's not just monarchs. They have hummingbirds and humpback whales and all sorts of interesting creatures on there. But it allows you as a citizen to just log in and say, I saw a monarch today, or I saw my first monarch egg today. And that helps scientists gather huge amounts of information. When I mentioned before that monarchs make it from Mexico to here, this is probably one that did. You can see how faded it looks. That's not my poor photography. That is, she was a very dilapidated looking monarch, raggedy edged wings and almost no color because the scales have fallen off. But she was still there laying egg, and you can see a very tiny piece of milkweed. And that's why, even if they lay on that, by the time the egg hatches, it will have grown some, and there will be food for that caterpillar. The tagging program, a lot of people are very worried about doing this. I've tagged over 50 this fall, which is really a good thing, because last year, most of the ones I had were, or caught, were diseased. And I don't tag them if they're diseased. I don't want to send them back out there. But this is a fun thing to do with kids. And it's very simple. You just take that, and there's the website shows you exactly what to do and how to do it. But you just place this tag, which gives information about where to send the information that you found. It has a website, it has a phone number, it has a number which is unique. So this one, WPM289, is unique to that butterfly, and somebody somewhere, me, has written down that that was a female. I released it on October something or other, and that's information then that goes into a big database for scientists. And monarchwatch.org is another wonderful resource for information. I'd love to help convince you to start doing the monarch mapping project. The Monarch Conservation Partnership has, through Fish and Game or Wildlife, has set this mapping up to see specifically what are we seeing in Arkansas. They're trying to draw more money for research and habitat conservation and renovation by showing how many monarchs are here throughout the seasons. And so if you use iNaturalist at all, it's really easy to upload information, but you can also do it on your computer. Again, these are some of my favorite websites and why, if you want to know more about monarchs. And most of them are concerned not just about monarchs. For this presentation, one of my greatest resources was a book by Heather Holm called Pollinators of Native Plants. And I have already confessed that I don't know much about a lot of pollinators. And I love the way it's laid out. It tells you, and many of these are plants that grow here. It tells you the range. It tells you so much about the insect interactions. This particular one has 2 more pages, and sometimes it'll be on predator insects. It's nicely laid out, very easy to read. And if you're wanting to know, okay, I like this monarch plant, how does it do for other insects? This is a great resource. She doesn't, of course, have every plant, but a lot of the ones that I talked about today, she does have in there. Another really useful resource when I'm trying to decide about plants and whether or not they benefit a large, and I'm also not just looking for pollinators, but beneficial insects in general, or insects that feed birds. IllinoisWildflowers.info is phenomenal. Now, I don't usually go in this direction and just type in that website. I usually have a plant I want to know about. So I'll type the name of that plant, for example, blue lobelia and faunal associations. And it will pull up a bunch of websites, but Illinois is almost always there. And they have just wonderful descriptors of the plant and where it grows and more than you wanted to know, but also will give you the information about the different insects. I like to use Prairie Moon also because they talk about the insects. This is a native plant nursery, but it often, when you look up a particular plant, will give you information about those. Missouri Wildflower Nursery also does those, and it's a very useful site. So there's so much I don't know, and so much I probably haven't answered, but I hope that I've at least whet your appetite for planting some of these things. And come visit us at the Botanical Garden, where we have the only butterfly house in the state. Winding down now, so we won't be open in the winter, but you're welcome to email me with questions at kittysanders4.com. No, excuse me, at gmail.com. And I will try to answer, or at least steer you towards an answer. And I'm finished, Eric.
Thank you, Kitty. That was very informative. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your knowledge with us. It's a great reminder of why we have wild ones. So I'm sure everyone learned a lot today. I know I sure did. I know we have a couple of questions so far. One from Phyllis Stair, wondering how many days on average to go from a chrysalis to a adult butterfly?
Generally, from chrysalis, they're usually in the chrysalis stage from 9 to 13 days, but I've seen them go longer.
Okay. And then Christy Jacobson asks, she has a question about aphids on milkweed plants. Will they kill the plant? And what insects can be introduced to eat them, the aphids, and not the monarch eggs?
Christy, you know better. I don't have the answer to that. Are you trying to trip me up here? It's our butterfly monarch raiser's biggest enemy, and there's not an easy answer. I try to get rid of what I can before I see any caterpillars, because almost everything you use will get the caterpillar too. I had a friend who said, why worry about it? It's a symbiotic relationship. Well, I worry about it because aphids draw ants, and what do ants like to eat? The eggs. So I want them off of there. Lissa always said, spray hard with a spray of water. Well, I must not be spraying right because it doesn't work for me. I sometimes use a soapy alcohol spray early on. Other people say, let nature take its course. Let the beneficials take care of it. And if you leave things, it will come into balance. I'm not that patient. The ladybugs will eat the eggs. We know that's the best for beneficials. Lacewings will eat. They're just serious predators that they'll get rid of your aphids. Sorry, I don't have a good answer.
Sounds like there may not be a great answer or a good solution. Yeah, no, I usually just, when I get the aphids, I just wait for the ladybugs to show up, but I'm sure they may be, consuming any eggs I may have on my milkweeds too. But we also get a lot on our goldenrods. Susan Rhodes says, pick aphids off and squish between your fingers. Kind of gross at first, but you get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a lot of
fingertips yellow.
And we have a lot of great feedback. We have from Carter and Trudy Kerrigan saying you're the best, Kitty, and think you're doing excellent presentations. Susan Rhodes says, thank you, wonderful, informative. And then, yeah, many others have given you really great feedback here. So, okay. Well, again, Kitty, thank you again. We really appreciate your sharing your time and your knowledge with us. I want to thank everyone for being with us here today. Again, the recording for this webinar, a link will be sent out to everyone who sent an email requesting one. And I'm going to talk to Kitty if she's comfortable with it. Maybe we can put it on YouTube too. Again, our next webinar will be at 2 p.m. on Thursday, October 22nd. That's where Dr. Don Steinkraus will be speaking on invasive species in Arkansas and why they matter. If you're interested in keeping up with more about what the Ozark chapter of Wild Ones is doing, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Ozark Wild Ones. You can get on our mailing list by emailing wildonesozarkchapter@gmail.com. And if you want to join our chapter, again, you can go to wildones.org/membership. Again, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you, Kitty, for sharing your knowledge with us. Oh, it looks like somebody has a question about who can be in Ozark Wild Ones. Yeah, I mean, when you choose a membership, you got to choose a chapter. So normally you would just choose a chapter that's closest to you. So if you're in Baxter County, you could choose the Ozark chapter. We'd be glad to have you. We're doing a lot of things virtually now anyway. So, and it looks like Phyllis has been asked to be added to a list. Let's see, it might be the same one somebody else up here was referring to. Oh, for native plant cells, along with Tammy Knowles. And we can get you their information. That way you can add them
right
when you need to. All right, well, great. Well, thanks everybody again. Happy to see everybody. Thank you again, Kitty. That was a great presentation, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.